Knowledge of the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven has been granted to you, but to them it has not been granted. That seems very odd, right? If Jesus loves us and he wants us to love him, and he knows that our salvation depends on this exchange, why would he intentionally hold back? Doesn't that seem to work against the mission of salvation if you share with some and then not with others? And as I think about this, it's not as unreasonable as maybe at first blush it seems. Like, think about how love works in your own life. If you're meeting a new friend for the first time, or you're going on that first date, do you just bear all? Do you share every passion, every hurt, every secret, every embarrassing moment? Do you just start airing your dirty laundry or announcing your character defects? I hope not. And isn't it the case that when other people do that with you right out the gate, it's like 20 red flags shoot up in your mind right away, and you say, you know what, I think I'm good on my own. The reason is because implicitly we already know there's a kind of rhythm to love. There's a gradual disclosure, like the careful opening of a flower whose petals protect its most precious part, the inner self. And this patient process allows the beloved time to receive and even be changed through each stage of the lover's gift. And in so doing, they actually learn to become stewards of the lover, while also protecting the lover's dignity. Until in the end, what happens? The communion is total, right? Eventually, the whole self is given, and each having more in the end than when they started, until they feel that without the other, their life would be incomplete. That's the rhythm of it. So when Jesus says, for example, to anyone who has, more will be given, and he will grow rich. For anyone who has not, even what he has will be taken away. What used to sound harsh in the context of love begins to make sense. Those who wish to participate in the exercise of love, whose hearts genuinely desire him, well, more of him is going to be given, and they will have more in the end because they have him. But for those who don't, who really just can't be bothered, whatever little they have, it's going to be taken away. I'm saying all this because I'm not actually going to stand before you today to talk about love. What I'm going to talk about is what sabotages it. Because there is a demon that undermines this whole process that I've just explained, and we suffer him all the time. In fact, he's so destructive to the spiritual life, and he's so pervasive in our times, that I've decided I'm going to preach a little mini-series on the topic because it's just that important. And I'm actually going to have these uploaded to Spotify, so if at any point you want to reference back to them, you're welcome to do so. Now, the demon that I'm referring to is a demon called Acedia. What is that? Acedia attacks the salvation of souls that is achieved in that exchange of love that I just explained by undermining our cooperation with it. God is always going to do his part. What remains uncertain is to what extent we freely choose to engage. And there are three principal ways that Acedia will do that. And the purpose of this reflection is to focus only on the first one. And the first one is to instill in us a total disgust of being. Now, what does that mean? When a disgust of being just starts to settle in, we begin to view freedom of autonomy as an absolute good in and of itself. And so therefore, anything that limits that, of course, we're going to despise. So we start to see this when there's like restlessness in the marital bond, in marriages. We start to resent the neediness of our children as if they're holding us back, or the growing needs of our elderly parents. We hate the place that we live or the demands of our job, the amount of money that we make, all of which we start to see as confining. And this goes even further into the moral boundaries of the gospel, or even the biological limits of the body. They frustrate us because they appear as barriers to our freedom and therefore what we believe is going to be our happiness. And so we feel trapped as if we're in a prison cell. And eventually we start fantasizing about life outside of them. If I had a totally different job, where I lived in a new neighborhood, if I had a whole new life, a different body, a new spouse, if I wasn't restrained by this strict conscience that I was given. We even say things like sex assigned at birth, right? Like it was given to you and you were trapped into it. And so what happens is that the spiritual state that we find ourselves in when acedia begins to take over is marked by lethargy, this inattentiveness, dissatisfaction, a feeling of tedium and restlessness, a hatred for place. Although sometimes it appears also in frenetic activity, floating from task to task to task, but all the while really, as busy as we seem, we're just avoiding the work that we ought to be accomplishing because we feel suffocated by it. And that's important because acedia is oftentimes as translated into like sloth, and we hear sort of like a laziness. But acedia can actually be this anxious activity, but it's an activity of avoidance, like picking up our phone for the 10th time to check our messages when really I meant to spend this time in prayer. Now all of this matters because in our relationship with God, this disgust of being is a problem, because being is what God has given us. He made me, a male with a vocation to this parish in this place with these people. And if I have a disgust with being, then I have a disgust with God who has given this being to me and the work and the vocation to which he has determined for me to achieve. And that's going to work against the plan. I mean, think about what we heard in the first reading with Isaiah. Isaiah described for us how God sends his word, and this word has a mission to fulfill. And the mission it describes is to care for the earth, to be fruitful, and to multiply. And the word is not to return back to God until it has completed the task for which he sent it. Naturally, of course, we think of Jesus, right? He is the Word. He's the Word who is sent from the Father, who comes down from heaven, who becomes flesh, fulfills the Father's business, and then on the cross cries out, "It is finished," right? The mission is done. And then he returns to the Father's house. But you notice in that reading, the language of caring for the earth, being fruitful, and multiply actually echoes God's commission to us from the garden. Which means we have a mission, we have a work to do, and Christ is he who shows us the way. And this mission proceeds from that dynamic of love that I mentioned in the beginning. And the goal is that by engaging it, God will transform us and then send us to be ambassadors into the world. But the devil hates that. And the demon of acedia, revolts against this mission, rebels against a mandate to build God's beautiful kingdom with the same rebellion that the devil had in the beginning. And if we're not paying attention and that influence from the demonic starts to happen, we find ourselves beginning to think and to feel in manners that are consistent with the demonic, until suddenly God's demands appear insufferable. Illegitimate restrictions on unbridled freedom. We hate the place that God has provided and the work that God has given, leaving us disgusted with the confines of being itself. Now, this happens to us individually, but it's happening to us socially. So what happens when this occurs? Well, we just try to find ways around the mission and around God's boundaries. So just look on a social level. To escape the servitude that we call motherhood, we have abortion and we make it even better. It's not only a right, it's to be expected, and if you have more than 2 children, you're frowned upon. We give divorce instead of calling people to commitment. We offer transitions instead of limiting people to biology. We prioritize feelings over truth. We prefer victimhood over accepting personal responsibility. And we flee from one distraction to the next, from the iPhone to the TV, to the conversations, to the food, to the video games, to the running, basically from anything that might actually limit us in our autonomy and self-determination, like God himself. And this is the goal, right? The goal for the demon is to get us to achieve this until we get to the end of our life, and what happens? We're unconverted, we're unchanged by that exchange of love, and the mission is unfulfilled. And then we return to the Father empty-handed. And the truth is, all of us feel this at some time in our life. So what's the remedy? The remedy are the following. First and foremost, trust God enough to accept the limits that he has established as for our good. Remain faithful when it happens and there's the restlessness of the soul and this contempt starts to rise. Choose to remain faithful to his word, which anchors us into the good and introduces stability against the winds of chaos. Challenge the restlessness of your heart as to its true motives. What's really going on here? And intentionally order your everyday based on a predetermined hierarchy of goods, so that the greatest good always comes first, and then we proceed from there. Then and only then will the demon be thwarted, and will God's work of love in us prevail, and the work for which he sent us yield fruit, and the good finally come to bear in our lives and ultimately in the world.